Shalom, this is Parshat Hayyei Sara. It's October the 25th, 2021. And we are reading Parshat Hayyei Sara, which I have to say is an amazing Parsha. uh, and the Parsha focuses on a number of things. First of all, it starts out with the death of Sarah, the burial of Sarah. It's a very interesting story that leads off the Parsha, and we focused on it in the past. The main part of the Parsha deals with uh, getting a wife for Isaac and dispatching Eliezer, Abraham's servant, with that
That's right.
challenge. Um, this story, I think, is really one of the great little short stories of the Torah. I admire the way it's composed, and of course, Eliezer is one of the great storytellers in the Bible, one of the great minor characters in the Bible. We focused on him in the past. I focused specifically last year on um, the injunction against marrying someone from the Canaanites. So you can review that. It's we have a video of that class last year, and I would recommend you review it uh, at top speed, double speed, so that it can go by in half the amount of time. Uh, this morning, I want to focus on the end of the parsha, which is a part that I don't think ever gets any attention, and this is Ketura, the this mysterious woman who becomes essentially Abraham's third wife. And even if I said that Abraham had a third wife, that might even sound odd to some of you. You may not be familiar with this, or it's glossed over so quickly in the course of reading. And of course, we never really comment on it because it doesn't have low-hanging fruit in terms of great sermonic material, right? The listing of genealogy rarely has that kind of sermonic material, except when I look at it, I find a sermon almost in everything. And I have found I think a very powerful message in this little paragraph, and I'm going to put it out to you and invite your discourse and debate with me, argument with me on this. I'm going to focus on it in a way that we have not yet had a chance to focus on it. So that's the Ketura. It's chapter 25 in the book of Genesis, and I'm going to begin to just kind of orient ourselves with this passage now. And here we go. So before we get into the passage, I'm very fond of putting up the map of the ancient Near East, and I want to recap for us what we have already studied and what we know, and that is as follows. We know that the map looks like this, okay? And if we recall, when the flood ends and Noah's children, Shem, Ham, and Japhet, populate the earth, Shem pretty much populates what we now call Mesopotamia. Japhet pretty much populates what we call Europe, Southern Europe, and Ham pretty much inhabits what we call Africa. There may be, some overlap here and there. Okay, so Shem is Mesopotamia, Ham is Africa, Japhet is Europe.
Europe.
Now, I have considered this, and I haven't seen it commented on by many people or other people, which doesn't mean much. It may mean that I'm way, way out there in my imagination. But you recall that when we meet Terach has his three sons, Abram, Haran, and Nachor. And Terach is the 10th in line from Noah. And I think Terah sees himself as a mini Noah because he begins to embark on a migration And it just so happens that his 3 sons are entrusted with populating this area. The land of Nahor will inhabit this area, which is now pretty much Syria, northern Syria, and into here. Haran, you recall, dies. And Haran's son Lot comes with Abraham. And we experienced in last week's Parsha basically the end of the story of Lot with the destruction of Sodom. I'm just going to make this larger here. It's not terribly focused, but the Sodom area, as you know, is the area around the Dead Sea. That area was lushly, it was highly inhabited and fertile. And after the destruction of Sodom, which coincided with a meteor airburst, as we saw last week, which I think was one of the most fascinating scientific discoveries that corroborates a biblical story, or may blend with a biblical story. The Lot runs away into the caves around the Dead Sea, and there he cohabits with his daughters, and he sires the nations of Moab and Ammon, and those nations live in the area just beyond the Dead Sea, in this area here. Moab and Ammon, and they appear later on in the Bible story as the Israelites are making their way to the land of Israel. They come through the Sinai and they enter the land through the Jordan, and they have to cross through the lands of Moab and Ammon, and they are not terribly hospitable. And the Torah in Deuteronomy gives instructions that you are not to allow these generations to, any descendants of those nations, to enter the land, enter the people. With the great irony that Ruth, who is a Moabite, marries a Judahite, and Ruth becomes the ancestor of King David. So that tells you quite a bit. So this is the way the land looks at the time of Abraham. He has his relatives up north. He has the relatives he doesn't talk to over here. Okay, like after Lot cohabits with his daughters, I think their relationship is over. I think Abraham can't handle having any connection with Lot at that point. And the truth is that Abraham moves away from that area and further south. He moves south to the Negev, and the story of Hayyei Sara straddles between Beersheba, which is further south around here, and Hebron, which is a little further to the north. If you think of Israel today, it's Jerusalem in the center, Bethlehem south of Jerusalem, Hebron south of Bethlehem, and Beersheba further south of all that. And if you come to this week's Shabbat, Moshe Gold will be telling us a little bit more about Hebron. I'm looking forward to that in person. Okay, so this is the Terach family. Terach's family gets to populate this, and we move on. What was God's promise to Abraham? God's promise was, I will make you a great nation. Asecha legoy gadol. Okay? And the second promise in chapter 17 was, you shall be the father of a multitude of nations, and you shall no longer be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I make you the father of a multitude of nations, of Hamon Goyim. I left out the Hebrew. I will make you exceedingly fertile and make nations out of you, and kings shall come forth from you. I will maintain my covenant between me and you and your offspring to come as an everlasting covenant throughout the ages, to be God to you and to your offspring to come. I assign the land you sojourn in to you and your offspring to come, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting hold, and I will be their God. So what we have here is essentially, I'm saying that there are two discrete promises here. They kind of get convoluted. The first promise is, I'm going to make you a great nation. Escha legoy gadol. I will make you a great nation, and that is your direct descendants. And your direct descendants come from you and Sarah, okay? And just hold into the back of your mind, file this for a moment, that Sarah, as we established, is actually a member of Abraham's family. She is a member of Abraham's family. In fact, without getting too kind of, intense in this, she's actually a half sister. She's a sister from another mother, okay? Which means that what the generations that will come from Abraham and that are preferred in the genealogy will be the child of Abram and Sarah, okay? And that is significant. But, as you recall, Sarah can't have any children. And so, through the story, Sarah says, here's Hagar, have a child with her. Abraham delightfully does so without kicking and screaming, has Ishmael. That creates a certain set of problems. Hagar is sent out while she's pregnant, and she's sent out again after Isaac is born. From last week's Parasha, she's sent out finally, but Hagar is promised that her son will be also many, many nations, and we see those nations, the descendants of Ishmael, listed at the end of this week's Parsha as well. Okay, so the second promise that Abraham will be a father of many nations is kind of fulfilled, but I'm going to say only partially fulfilled, because Ishmael right now is, he will become his own nation. There are 12 descendants from Ishmael, but Ishmael doesn't play a huge role in the later biblical tradition. Something happens to Ishmael. There is a few mentions of Ishmael in Parshat Vayeshev a few weeks from now. When Joseph is in the pit, Judah says, let's sell him with this band of Ishmaelim. The Ishmaelim appear as nomadic traders in the land. But the text there is complicated because the Midianites take him out of the pit and sell him to the Ishmaelites. So there are Ishmaelites, Midianites, and Midianites all involved in that story, and they're all involved in trade. And so what we have here is these groups, and we'll talk about them in a second. They are nomadic traders that live in the land. I'm going to go back to the map here. Okay, so you see that there are trade routes. If this is the Arabian desert here, the trade routes are along the coast or in the center and up through here. They're around the desert, or they're from the south and they move forward. Okay, so we have to imagine that this area, which contains a multitude of different kinds of peoples, also engages in some kind of trade. And the major item that those Ishmaelites, Midianites, and Mennonites trade in is spices, which is significant. Okay. Before I stop, I'm gonna just go on one more little paragraph here, and then I'll get any questions that you have. Okay. So we have Abraham's promise, God's promise to Abraham that you will be a great nation. And then God's promise to Abraham that he will be the father of many nations. And that the second promise is partially fulfilled because Ishmael is, a single individual, but only later on do we discover that he will have, basically 12 tribes of his own. And then the story moves through this Parsha. Sarah dies. Isaac gets a wife. Isaac gets married. Isaac lives very far from Abraham. Beautiful text that Rebecca sees Isaac from a distance. She falls from the camel. She is introduced to him. He takes her into his mother's tent, and marries her and loves her and is comforted from the loss of his mother. A very interesting and deeply psychological text in terms of what it means and what that marriage means. And next week, of course, we have Rebecca, who we have said many times is really the most outstanding of the matriarchs. She's the most fully developed character of the matriarchs, and certainly a powerful woman in her own right. In fact, my colleagues on Parsha Talk, Rabbi Kalmanovsky especially, will say it's really, you really need to look at the patriarchs not as Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, but Abraham, Rebecca, and Jacob, because Rebecca is a kind of mirror image of Abraham. She herself makes a kind of Lech Lecha journey, and that's a good line of inquiry for Rebecca. We may pursue that. So at the end, though, we have this woman, Ketura, and we don't know who she is. Who is Ketura? The rabbinic tradition says that she's a gar. There are reasons why the rabbinic tradition says that she's a gar. We're not going to go into that a lot. Earliest commentators debate that. There are commentators. Rashi says that she's a gar. Other commentators like Ibn Ezra and Rashbam say she's not. Bottom line, we really don't know. Some hypothesize that she is a local woman, right? Maybe a Canaanite, even though Abraham banned Isaac from marrying a local Canaanite woman. So, it's very interesting that we have dealt with this question of why the Canaanite women were banned for Isaac for all sorts of reasons picked up by the tradition, that they were pagans and that they were evil, and you can list a litany of reasons why Canaanite women would be banned, notwithstanding the fact that one generation later, or 2 generations later, the children of Jacob will all marry Canaanite women. They unless, of course, you really kind of, try and splice a lot of hairs or split a lot of hairs, it's pretty clear. Judah, for example, marries, it's explicit that he marries a Canaanite, and there is a relationship, of course, it goes very bad, between Dinah and a Canaanite, or people who live in the land. And so it's about at this time that the children of Jacob will end up marrying women, local women. And the reason for that, I think we went into last year, is because by the time that there are 12 sons of Jacob, you marry into the clan. It's like the Kennedys. You don't, you marry into that, and you're not worried about any kind of dilution of the family values. So Ketura may in fact be a local woman. You could hypothesize that she was one of the other servants. I doubt that she was an Egyptian. It's best, so we don't know. But what we do know is that she becomes the mother of some peoples that are identified either later in the Bible or in biblical scholarship as Arabian tribes. And this is the chart of the text. So Abraham and Ketura, they have Yokshan, Zimran, Medan, Ishbak, Shuach, and Midian. Midian goes on to have another 5 children, Ephah, Efer, Hanoch, Abida, and Eldaah. And Yokshan has Shiba and Dedan. Some of these are familiar to us. Midan appears later on in the Bible, later on in the story. Midanim. Midian, of course, is a really interesting case. We'll talk about Midian shortly. These tribes of Midian are not, I don't think they appear later on. Midian is an interesting case because where does Midian figure out prominently in the Torah? Midian, I'm going to stop sharing for a second and go to the full text here. Unplug myself. So, how does Midian figure into the later text? Who's a Midianite? Midianite, well,
Yitro.
Moses will marry the daughter of Yitro, who is the Midianite. Yeah, you got it. Okay, so Yitro is a Midianite. Okay, this is very interesting, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I'm doing this only because I might forget to say this. But the uh, just as Isaac is the child of Abraham and his half sister, some Levites that descend from Moses are the children of Moses and a relative, Moses and the daughter of Midian. If we go back to this to the chart here, okay, we see that Midian is the child of Abraham and Ketura. So if Moses marries a descendant of a Midianite, he is the only character in the Torah that is actually married to a different line of descendant from Abraham, right? All the others, we are assuming, once we get to Jacob and his sons, by the time that there are 12 tribes and they are having children, the cousins are marrying each other, okay? So they can all trace lineage through their cousins back to Abraham. The same way that, when Jews marry Jews today, we all say that we're in the same family, even though we're at very, very, distant branches of the same family. All Jews will say we can trace ourselves back to Abraham. But Moses, sorry, the Levites who descend from Moses will trace themselves back to Abraham in a dual track, both as descendants of Midian and as descendants of Abraham. So they're the only group that has a dual lineage back to Abraham and not only a single lineage. And that itself is fascinating. Okay? I hope you have a question. Go ahead, or anybody. Go ahead.
Listen, I'm watching my son.
Okay, I'll call you. Okay, go ahead, Ilana.
So talking about what you just said, so Yitro is a descendant of Abraham. If Tzipora,
yes.
If Tzipora is, so Yitro, which gives him a lot of credit. Even
absolutely. Look, I'm showing you the chart again. So it's Avram and Ketura. It comes to Midian. If Yitro, I don't know what tribe he's a descendant of, but Yitro is in this quadrant of the chart. Okay, so Yitro is a descendant of Abraham through Midian and through Ketura. That is fascinating, which means that Moses marries a descendant of Abraham who is not through the line of Jacob. Okay, I mean you could argue that David is a descendant. Well, no, David is not. David is a descendant of Moab, and that is not Abraham. That's a Haran. Okay, so that makes it even it's what I'm saying. It's much more complicated. The Moses issue, I think, is a very compelling issue because it says that there's something that makes Moses and his descendants, the Levites who descend from Moses, special in that their lineage comes in two tracks from Abraham. Okay, that's a very interesting phenomenon. Okay, so
I didn't finish.
Go ahead.
So it says in Hebrew, "Vayosef Avraham."
Yes.
"Vayikach isha."
Yes.
"Ushma Ketura."
Yes.
So Vayosef, he added, meaning I have a feeling that it is Hagar. Since Sara died, he went back to Hagar.
You're following Rashi and the tradition, and of course we support that also. I think there are other views here. I'm gonna focus on that a little later. So we're holding the question. I'll just to kind of be a teaser, which is Yosef. It means something more.
He did it again. He did it again, lad.
Exactly. So that word I think is very, very critical. That word is critical.
Also, she didn't want to stay with her previous name because she wasn't so successful.
Okay. Look,
so
you know, that makes all sorts of assumptions. You know, the other thing is that I mean, the rabbis and Rashi especially, and this is going to come out in another way in this text. The rabbis are sensitive to a human dimension in these stories, and they have a lot of sympathy for Hagar. Why? Because he kicked her out. He was cruel to her, and so in the midrashim that deposit that Ketura is actually Hagar, it's a way of, you'll forgive me for saying this, I'll be critical about Abram. It's a way of letting Abram off the hook. Abram was cruel, and this way he makes amends for his cruelty, and he is able to start a life with Ketura that in the end brings forth quite a few more children. Okay, yes, go ahead, Ruth.
So do any of the commentators comment on the fact that Abraham had children with Ketura at all? Because there was all this lamenting and hand-wringing of, how am I going to have kids? I'm 100 years old. More years have passed. He has 6 kids, so that's a minimum of 6 years. He keeps having kids. Like, what's up with that? Does anybody comment on that?
Well, you did, and there are people who comment on it. And it's good that you noticed that. I mean, it's a very interesting. I mean, we're reading the text at face value. You know, not trying to do too much. You know, question too much about the ages, which of course are you know, they don't seem to be reasonable. But Abraham says exactly what you said, that he doesn't think he can have children. It just so happens that, you know, he gets you know, new wave of testosterone at the age of whatever it's age of 140. We'll show that later, and he becomes quite active at that ripe old age, and that itself is a puzzle. And the one way of reconciling the puzzle, and some of the commentators will do this. They'll say, look, there's no order in the Torah. The wife Ketura, and let's assume for a moment that she's a third wife. She is the wife that he lives with, or that he cohabits with occasionally during the course of his marriage with Sara. Polygamy is not unknown in the ancient world. Of course, we're going to encounter that with Jacob. Jacob has 4 wives. Isaac is the only monogamous one of the bunch. Abraham, those who are inclined to that question, Ruth, of like, you know, come on, he's 140 years old, what's going on? You know, are saying, look, this marriage took place earlier on. I'm taking a very, I don't want to say, I'm following the text in the order that it's presented, even though that's sometimes a non-advisable course of interpretation. But I'm following that because the editor, and here we'll use that technical term, the teller of the story is placing this here for a reason. And the reason is to teach us something, and I'm going to take, you know, the message of this is going to be something that I'll hold off to the end here. What is the message of this? Okay. And so the one message here of this is that, look, he's not going to marry another woman during the lifetime of Sarah, okay? Despite the fact that this marriage between Abram and Sarah was, let's just say, not the Garden of Eden, okay? I'm someone who is kind of critical about that marriage because he doesn't behave to her, you know, from time to time with tenderness, even though there is plenty of rationale that can be made for saying, you know, tell them that you're my sister, not my wife. You know, even you can argue the morality of that. that certainly has an effect. And then, of course, the altercations between Sarah and Hagar and Sarah and Abraham over Hagar and Ishmael, those are not comfortable moments. And then, of course, the sacrifice of Isaac, which, imagine the rabbis, as it says, imagine writing the play of, where have you been today? Where did you go? How was your day? Well, I went to take Isaac for a sacrifice. Oh, that's so nice. What did you sacrifice? Well, we ended up sacrificing a ram because I was intending to sacrifice him. You what? Right? Write that one. Okay, John, go ahead.
Well, and there's a fitting end, I think, because after that story, Sarah never speaks to Abraham again.
That's correct.
She's not even living with him.
That's correct. That's correct. Okay. Susie, you posted the Dead Sea Scrolls. What did you want to say there?
Yeah, so there's a text, fascinating text in the Dead Sea Scrolls that has love poetry written by Abraham about Sara that makes Shir Hashirim look tame.
Okay. Yeah, so they have to get around this in many, many different ways. The text itself doesn't really leave the text is very spare, and it doesn't give us any illusion that this was a perfect marriage. I mean, the rabbis certainly make it out to be that they were two missionaries going off to who knows where to set up little shtiblach and convert people. Okay, the text says something else. Gitel.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback on what Ruth said. So, as opposed, if Ketura is really Hagar, and he didn't have these children before Sarah died, then how could it be Hagar having all these children? Because she also would have been old by that time.
That's right. So as I said,
that makes no sense either that she could be Hagar.
Well, look, so we have miracles, of course. That's a fact.
That's a lot of miracles to have so many children after the fact.
Or again, one way out of it is this was a contemporary marriage to Sarah. I'm not in favor of that interpretation because it just makes Abraham into someone a little more cruel or self-centered than we would like. Or a position that is slightly far-fetched, but it's part of the way that the Bible is really unfolding here, which is to say, these extraordinary people are extraordinary in many, many ways, and one of their extraordinary characteristics is that in what is normally identified as the old age, they go on and have lives, and that's something really to kind of close your eyes, take a sip of wine, meditate on, and to think about. Is that what the Bible is saying here? Let me move on into the text because I think
Rabbi.
Yeah, go ahead, Skip.
Could we really go off the wall here?
Yeah, no.
And say this was the fulfillment of God's second promise to Abraham.
I'm going to propose that as one of my reasons.
Okay.
And let's go on here. Okay, you've anticipated my lesson. Okay, so this is the chart, and here we go. Here's the text. Abram took another wife, whose name was Ketura. She bore him Zimran, Yokshan, Midan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuach. Yokshan begot Sheba and Dedan. The descendants of Dedan were the Jashurim, the Tushim, and the Umim. The descendants of Midian were Epha, Epher, Enoch, Abida, and Eldah. These were the descendants of Ketura. Biblical scholarship puts these descendants, the six children of Ketura, and then there are descendants of others. So when I examined some of the scholarship on this, and this came from Nachum Sarna, and it came from another commentator who looks at the geography of the ancient world and tries really to kind of pin certain either place names or tribal names to areas in the ancient world. And so what you have here, according to their hypothesis, and it seems kind of interesting that all of these groups, the Ketura children, are the children that populate the Arabian Peninsula mostly, and all the way up to parts of Mesopotamia. Should really be slightly lower here. Shua is the right side of the Euphrates River. But Ishabak, he says, it's probably in Syria. Midian is where Saudi Arabia is. Zimran Yokshan is near Mecca. Medan is somewhere in the center. And all of these are the Arabian peoples, the progenitor of the Arabian tribe, which is actually quite interesting. Which means that, and I have to say, you know, the Abraham Accords, not only in terms of their diplomatic breakthrough, but what is so interesting about the title, the Abraham Accords, is that I think whoever branded them that way, whoever created the title or the name, it really was a stroke of brilliance, because it connects to a mythology that all of the Arabian peoples are descendants of Abraham. We usually talk only in terms of Ishmael because that's what appears poetically. Ishmael is the metonymy, the stand-in for all of the Arabian peoples. But it's actually not true. The Ketura tribes are the Arabian tribes. And so the children of Abraham are not only the children of Ishmael, but the children of Ketura. And I'm not really sure why Ketura gets short shrift in you know, people who are writing poetry about this, or, you know, prayers, may the children of Isaac and Ishmael, all that. No, it's the children of Abraham who are Ketura and Ishmael and Isaac. Those, and the Abraham Accords really encompasses those peoples in the Arabian Peninsula who are the descendants, you know, mythologically, of the Ketura nations. Okay, that's a fascinating little point there. Okay, let's go on. So this is where they look, where it looks like on the map. Okay, and then Sarna has in his commentary on Genesis all the different places. We can just skip over that. The map tells the story. But I'm saying so much for geography. What's going on here? Why does he take another wife? Is there another story here? What is the relationship between God and Abram at this point? All right, so let's start with the last question. The relationship between God and Abram at this point is that God is no longer speaking to Abraham. Okay, once the Akedah is over, there is no speaking to Abraham. And it almost appears as if Abraham is on his own. Okay? I'm going to go down and say, Vayosef Avraham. We talked a little bit about that. The word Vayosef is the critical word here. Because Vayosef is something that appears in many different contexts, not a lot. There's only about 3 or 4 others, 3 in Genesis and a few more in the rest of the Torah. But look at where Vayosef is. It's in the Noach story. Vayachel od shivat yamim acharim Vayosef shalach et hayonah min hateva. He again set out the dove. It means that he didn't really have to, but he sends it out again. It's to do it again. I'm going to take initiative and do it again. In here, when it occurs when he is speaking to God, Abraham is speaking to God, arguing for the fate of the people of Sodom. Maybe you'll find 40 people there, right? And this is the third exchange. The first one was 50, the second one was 45, and the third one is 40. And you can tell by the third, which is the transitional line in that story, that Abraham is really reaching, is really trying hard. He's out of his own initiative. He could have stopped And that's the point. He could have stopped, but he's going beyond his limitations. Vayosef means to go beyond the imposed limitation set for you and to go on your own initiative. Okay? Vayosef Abraham. This is our text. And I'm interpreting here, he says, he would have been fine with Hagar, with Sarah, with Isaac, with Ishmael. But he goes beyond for his own initiative. God is not telling him. I'm anticipating what I'm saying later, but we have another Vayosef with Pharaoh. He is stubborn and he goes again. In other words, kind of breaks through his own restraints. And we have that with Balak, and we have that with the angel. Once more, Vayosef Malach, and we have that with Samuel when God is calling out to Samuel again and again and again and again. It seems that every single time he has to God, in the case of Samuel, calling out to Samuel is, I'm going on beyond what I need to do normally, beyond the restrictions that I know. He could have listened to me on the first call, but he didn't. So I called him again. I called him again. I called him again, right? A calling again is out of your own initiative. And lastly, there's this text from Job, which says that God, Vayosef Adonai, et kol asher liyov lemishneh. And that, I think, is, you just get everyone file that idea for a moment, okay? So there are many, many instances of Vayosef in the Bible. It seems to mean to do something again, or to do something in addition to a previous circumstance in which the status quo was sufficient, but I'm doing it out of a self-directed initiative, okay? So I don't have to, but I'm going to do it more. I don't have to talk to you. I don't have to send out the dove, but I'm going to do it more. I don't have to talk to you, but I'm going to do it more. I don't have to sin, but I'm going to sin more. I don't have to bless. I don't have to call you, but Yosef is to, it's like there's a deeper sense in that word. Thus, here's my interpretation. Abram took a new additional wife, Ketura, out of his own initiative, without having been directed, okay? He was fine with Hagar, finished, she's off. Sarah, he could have been fine, and he didn't have to do this, okay? So he takes a wife out of his own initiative. Why? So why does he do this? Some reasons. So, as Skip alluded, Abram needs to fulfill the promise of becoming a father of a multitude of nations. So I'm calling this the sharp view is initiative. Abraham is already at the point where he's saying, look, I'm 140 years old, okay? You know what? God promised me way back when I was 75 that I would be the father of a great nation. Okay, what do I have to show for? I have my Pishkala son Isaac, who can't even find his own wife. I got to go find a wife for him, okay? That's who's going to be my great nation. Okay, so God said, that's who's going to be my nation. That's who's going to be my nation. But, God help him, okay? I've got him his wife. I'm starting him out, and let's see what happens, okay? But God said to me, I'm going to be the father of great nations. What am I supposed to do? I'm going to sit on my tuchus? I'll get moving. So he goes out and he finds a new wife. It's just a simple interpretation. He needs to fulfill what God promised him. But there's no magic here. There's no God, told him to. There's no talking. There's no miracles. There's no altar building, and there's no angels, nothing. It's like, I'm doing it. I'm doing it myself, whether you like it or not. I'm going on, okay? And that's it. I'm taking the initiative because that's what I do. I'm Abraham, okay? God tells me to go, and I go. And I was good. I was ready to go by myself, but everybody came with me and prevented me from doing this already 70 years ago. So I'm doing it now. Okay, I'll stop. Marlene, you have a question.
Well, we're told way back in the Garden of Eden that man is not supposed to be alone. So maybe he's just doing it because he's, quote, horny. Well,
I'm going to hold on to that interpretation also because that fits into another framework of understanding, and that will give us another set of insights there. It's a very valuable.
he obviously loved his wife, Sarah, because he doesn't abandon her dead body and just leave it wherever it is. He buys a special place that he's going to make known to all the nations because of the public purchase. So there's some connection there. It isn't like he, I don't see where he's still thinking that this is the only, because if he could have one son, why couldn't his one son, Yitzchak, have more sons and more sons, B'nai Yisrael?
Yitzchak is not a self-starter. And I would just say, just to kind of take the opposite view of Sarah, which and Abram's relationship, which you've heard me say many times, is that, okay, so how do you explain the fact that they're not living together? How do you explain the fact that they don't really talk to each other, and that there seems to be estrangement between the two of them? I'm reading it this time. I'm involved with so many families, and of course, end of life issues, and so we have different groups of people in the shul. We have people who set up all they buy their graves. Whenever we do a sale, they go and buy their graves. Okay, no, nobody's telling them to do. Nobody wants to do that, but they figure, you know what? I'd rather do it now, and then burden my children. And then there's some people that don't, and then there's some people that do a full kind of pre-arrangement, right? I don't want my children to do it, and they explain that I'm doing that out of love. So I read the beginning of this Parsha with a little bit of puzzlement, and maybe we'll talk about it in my podcast with the guys, which is that, look, if you loved her, wouldn't you want to be together with her? Yeah, he ends up together with her, but wouldn't you want to take care of that ahead of time? Why are wouldn't you want to discuss that with your wife before you decide where you're going to put her, right? That's what normal couples do. They have a conversation with each other. They say, where are we going to be buried? Okay, well, I think we should be buried here. What about this place? What about that place? What about this place? Oh, we like this place. Okay, and they come in. They do that. Go ahead, Ellie. Go ahead.
Rabbi.
Wait, Ellie had her hand up. Go ahead and then skip.
Okay,
go ahead. You're muted. I can't hear you. Ellie, unmute. Go ahead.
I never saw this as a happy marriage where they talk to each other. There was never a conversation between the two of them. He says, Abimelech, take her, she's my sister. She's, there was nothing there of tenderness or happiness. Even when the three guys came and they promised something, so she looked one way and he looked another way, there was no togetherness there. And we know of many marriages that are good marriages and they're not together. They're not together, and that's what keeps their marriage alive. And we know of other marriages where they are very, very much together. I don't see this one as one of the together marriages.
Well, I'm in your camp on this, Ellie. We agree on this. The Midrashic tradition. Again, they want to make him out to be like the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Chaya Mushka. They want to really and they've projected onto this couple a kind of regal status, in which she was, all comforting and he was all, and all of that works in terms of, mythology. But the text is a much more complicated story. I love the text because it says what it says. It says something that is related to life, which is that, exactly as you said, Ellie, not all marriages are perfect. There are very few marriages that are perfect. And some manage on their own microcultures where there are domains that are divided and everybody seems to get along in some way, and I don't think that this was ever purported to be they lived happily ever after. We do have love in the Torah. Look, Isaac and Rebekah. I think Isaac and Rebekah, it's a loving marriage. He loves her, right? Jacob and Rachel, he loves her. It just so happens that he's also married to her sister, and there are two other women in there, okay? But he does love her, and he fights with her, and it's a tempestuous marriage. Abraham and Sarah, there's bickering going on there. Skip, you wanted to say something. And then John.
Yes, I would flip this coin on the other side.
Okay.
And I would look at Abraham and his third wife with the 6 children.
Yeah.
That God made a promise to Abraham. You'll be the father of nations. So, and this is looking at God. If God thought that was incorrect and it wasn't what he wanted, why didn't God interfere?
I think that's a great question. Here, it's the answer is that Abraham is pushing the story along without God interfering. Abraham is and this is I think this is one of the great themes of the Bible, is that God has plans, but human beings are the ones that have the freedom to express those plans or to change those plans, and everything is a result of human choices. And what you have there is the result of human choices. Yes.
But Moses did the same thing.
Exactly.
And it was not retribution, that's not the right word, but there was something to be paid for.
There's a price, yes. All of that is true. And that's I think the beauty of the biblical tradition is that, yeah, there seems to be an overarching plan to all this that is kind of ordained. But every single human being in the Bible makes their choices. And I think that that's really, one of the great themes, that human freedom is the great theme of the Bible. John, you have a question there? Go ahead.
Yeah. I think that the Bible is great literature and very modern in that so much is unsaid.
Well, it depends what modern literature you read, because too much sometimes in modern.
I mean, Henry James, for example. Of course,
no, and that really makes the quality. And that's why we're able to have such a fertile conversation. All right, let me go back into yeah. Go ahead, Ilana.
Just a comment about the name Ketura.
Yes.
It comes from Ketore.
Sure. So
incense.
Not an accident. It's not an accident that she would be associated with the incense trade. Right. Very good. Okay. So the sharp view, why Abraham marries Ketura? Because he takes the initiative to fulfill God's promise. Let's recap the story. God instructs Abraham to leave Ur. We said all this. At the age of 100, he has a second child, through whom the covenant will be passed. Isaac is 40 years old now. Abraham has to secure a wife for him. Does Abraham believe that Isaac will produce many nations? Now that Sara is no longer alive, he can get started again, and that's what he's doing. I'm going to now propose a softer view. And Marlene, you hinted to this. And this is best expressed in a beautiful comment by a fellow who wrote a commentary named Ha'emek Davar. It's Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. He lived in Russia, born in Russia 1860, and died in Warsaw 1893. A very, very important rabbinic figure, and a leader of the yeshiva of Volozhin, and an important rabbinic dynasty emerges through him, including the Soloveitchik family. He wrote as follows on the comment to the verse: Mishum lotov heyot adam levado. I love it for its brevity and its simplicity. Why? Why does he marry Ketura? His wife died. He's a widower. What is he going to do? He needs a wife. So he gets married again. Shouldn't he get, what rule is there that he shouldn't get married? Okay? He found another wife, and it's not uncommon. This is who he is. And he has a little joy in his face. Like, he looks like a happy guy. Okay? And he has an interesting biographical piece of information. He lost his first wife. His first wife was Reina Batya. She had 4 children. She died at an unknown age, sometime in the 1860s, I think. And she was an advocate for women's study. And he married a second wife and had 3 more children. Not an uncommon scenario. People start new families after the loss of a first spouse. It's tragic, of course. We have, lots and lots of circumstances where this happens. And it's, the Hasidic lore is filled with this. Nachman Braza didn't have children with the second wife, but the first wife died. So he marries a second wife to not be alone. My late teacher, Rabbi Ezra Silverman, lost his first wife. She died. They had 5 children. He had 5 children with the first wife. 4 children with the first wife, I'm sorry. And she died. And then he married a second wife and had another child with her. And so, and she died at a fairly young, as a young mother. And so this is not an uncommon story in human life, okay? It just so happens that Abram's 140 years old when this happens. That's odd, okay? Yes, we admit. But in the course of life, throughout the ages of people, whether they are young or whether they are old, every single person here knows of people who either through a tragic loss at the beginning of their early stages of adulthood or a loss in their later years of adulthood go and find other companions and live a fulfilling life. Okay, 2 participants have raised their hand. Go ahead.
It's very interesting that the men find a second wife. The women, the widow doesn't always find a second husband.
Indeed.
And it's all part of that whole patriarchal society that we're talking about.
Indeed. And that is true. And I mean, I'm going to, concede that point to Ellie because we are focused on Abraham. And I did think about this in reading the story. And I think, it's not told from Sarah's perspective. Sarah dies, okay? But Abraham, we're focused on something extraordinary about him, and it's that he goes out, he wants to have another wife. Okay.
And he also needs somebody to take care of his young children. I mean, that's one of the really positive reasons for men to be married.
Go ahead, Marlene.
And
Marlene and Alana.
When did we start knowing that a day was 24 hours and a year was 365?
I don't know how to answer that other than to say it's not something that I can get drawn into because it's arbitrary almost. Are the ages symbolic? Yeah, they have a symbolic weight to them, certainly. But the story is meant to work. It works on a narrative logic. Okay, Abraham dies at 175. Isaac dies at 180. Yaakov dies at 147. There's an internal logic to this. We get involved in these things. Kind of try and line up the clues of the ages in the Torah and try and figure out what happened when, and we get some interesting results from that. Alana, go ahead.
I just want to say that the Haftarah or Hayyei Sara is about David HaMelech that at his old age took a wife to keep him warm.
Well, she wasn't exactly a wife.
Huh?
She wasn't exactly a wife. She was,
not a wife. Sorry,
a companion,
a woman,
a girl, a woman.
A girl, right? It's such a lovely story.
A young girl.
It's interesting that this is the Haftarah for Hayyei Sara.
Yeah, Avishag the Shunammite. John, you got another one? All right. Let me go back to my text. We're almost out of time. We are out of time, and I just want to kind of wrap it up with this. So not uncommon. So I'm going to offer the blended view, which is that I mentioned that Job is there. I found it very significant that the word Vayosef occurs also with Job. V'Adonai shav et shvut Iyov v'hitpalalo ba'ad re'ehu vayosef Adonai kol asher le'Iyov le'mishneh. The Lord restored Job's fortunes when he prayed on behalf of his friends, and the Lord gave Job twice what he had. We don't have to go into the story of Job. You basically know that Job lost everything and suffered terribly. And then at the end of his life, he has more. And let me just read the last lines of Job. The Lord restored Job's fortunes when he prayed on behalf of his friends. And the Lord gave Job twice what he had before. All his brothers and sisters, all his former friends came to him and had a meal with him in his house. They consoled him and comforted him, and for all the misfortune that the Lord had brought upon him, each gave him 1 kesita and each 1 gold ring. Thus the Lord blessed the latter years of Job's life more than the former. He had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she-asses. He also had 7 sons, 3 daughters. The first he named Yemima, the second Kezia, the third Keren Apuch. Nowhere in the land were women as beautiful as Job's daughters to be found. Their father gave them estates together with their brothers. Afterward, Job lived 140 years to see 4 generations of sons and grandsons. I'll stop there. This is, heartwarming in the sense that the man lost everything. He had a horrible life. He was crushed, okay? And then everything gets restored double to him, okay, in a way of consolation. Reading the story of Job carefully, you want to ask, did he remember the first family? Of course he remembered the first family. Of course he mourned them. Of course he mourned what he lost. But he was given comfort in the blessings of his old age. And then he lived 140 years later. And I'm thinking, what's the deal with the 140? How old was Abraham when Isaac was born? 100. How old was Isaac when he got married? 100. He was 40. How old? The Ketura story is placed in the Torah following the marriage of Isaac. How old was Abraham when he married Ketura? 140. And so I'm going to say, as a kind of leap here, this is not an accident, okay? That the numbers line up symbolically, either symbolically or coincidentally, or maybe it have nothing to do with one another. But the point is that if you look at Abraham's life as a life that is not a perfect life, a life that's filled with challenge, a life that's filled with trauma, upheaval, loss, who does he have left in his life? Okay? Abraham had a very challenging life. At the age of 140, what does he have? He's got no wife, no second wife, no sons, no brothers, no nephew, no relatives close by, and no real friends. One way I was thinking about this class was saying, look at do a kind of almanac of Abraham and look at all the relationships. He's got nobody. He's got, the patriarch of our nation. His wife is dead. He is estranged from his 2 sons. His brother, is a rival, lives in, Haran, has no, never writes to him. He lives alone. He likes living alone, but he's got nobody. And this is how he's going to end out his life? He's Abraham, okay? What does he do? He starts over, chooses life. He realizes that these children are not going to inherit the covenant. The privilege will always remain with Isaac. He realizes that they will not inherit the land, but he sends them off to start new nations who will play some roles in the unfolding of Abraham's story. Here's the conclusion of Abraham's story. Abram willed all that he owned to Isaac, but to Abram's sons by concubines, Abram gave gifts while he was still living and sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the land of the east. In other words, Arabia. This was the total span of Abram's life, 175, and Abram breathed his last, dying at a good, ripe age, old and contented, and he was gathered to his kin. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, field of Ephron, the field that Abraham brought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried, Sarah his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac, and Isaac settled in Beer Lachai Roi. And that's the story. The story is that he has another chapter. He has the next chapter. His life doesn't end with Sarah. It's interesting. God said, "Go for it. I will make you a great nation." And so he tries everything that he can do to make the great nation. He's left with one son who will be that nation. God promises him that he will be the father of many nations. And so he takes destiny into his hands and makes those nations. Earlier on, it does say, and I left this out unintentionally, but the preamble before the story of Eliezer and getting a wife for Isaac says, V'Adonai beirach et Avraham bakol. God blessed Abraham with everything. That means, very simply, he's got everything. What does he need anything for? Clearly, he needs companionship. Clearly, he needs another person in his life. And clearly, he is not satisfied with bakol. He wants to pursue things. And this is one of the reasons why I think he's such an extraordinary character. Because on the one hand, he does everything that God wants from him. On the other hand, he's pushing against the envelope all the time. And the story of Ketura is, I think, Abraham's attempt to take matters into his own hands, and B, it really is, in the most charitable way of interpreting this, a life affirmation story. I'll end with one thought, and I was looking for examples of this, and I'm sure, people after the Holocaust who lost their first families, right, in the Holocaust, and some of them were completely crushed, and some said, look, I've got to start over. I've got to marry another woman. I've got to marry, and I'm talking from a male perspective, and they had a whole other family, right, and lived on and began having children at a much older age because their first families that they made in their 20s and early 30s, they were decimated. Imagine taking a man or a woman who had a first family and their family was destroyed. So they have two choices basically. One, which is I'm not going to live and that's it, or I'm going to try and find the best way to live. And Abraham, it's a longer life, of course. It's accordioned out over the span of 175 years. The first 75 years we don't know about, okay? But we know about ages 70, the next 100 years. The next 100 years are filled with lots and lots of real challenges, difficulties, and growth and absurdities and impossibilities. And he's at a stage in his life where he now can enjoy his life. And 140 is not too late. Let's go ahead, Robert.
So along with the interpretation you provided, I'd like to very quickly offer another message that this hits me with, and it may be off the deep end. But to what degree does the take-home message represent reconciliation? And in fact, Ketura and Ishmael are kind of what you would call proto-teshuvah, in terms of their change, the change in the name, and people coming together again, with Ishmael going to help bury, people coming back together. And the incense, I'm very interested in that term, Ketura, in terms of the linkage that Ilana mentioned.
So I think that's certainly one of the great themes in the end of Abraham's life, is that the two sons do come together and that there's reconciliation between the two sons. I think it's not lost on those of us who read the Torah very closely that Isaac has a certain affinity to Ishmael. He lives in the basic region where Ishmael is purported to have lived, and other things have happened to Ishmael. And the Be'er Lachai Ro'i is the place where Hagar had that meeting with the angel. So these are places associated with Ishmael. And look, if I present Abraham as a tragic figure, we could also present Isaac as, I would even say, even a more tragic figure.
But I guess what I was saying is Ketura, if she was Hagar, the first woman to do teshuvah or proto-teshuvah.
So is it she who's doing teshuvah or Abraham is doing teshuvah?
All of them.
All of them. And so that would be a very, very nice way to read this story. It's a little too nice for my taste. I have a little more edge than this.
I just wanted another possibility.
Are that nice. I'm sorry to say, I just don't think that they're gracious. There's a certain grace to them, but they're hard-nosed, hard-edged Semite people who don't take no guff. They're stubborn people, and it takes a while to kind of mollify them and to sand off the edges. There's, Abraham, by the end of his life, he's content. Savea, okay? Savea, is a nice word. There's contentment in his life. I mean, we could go another way and ask, what Isaac and Jacob. Look, Isaac is 100 years old when he gives the blessing, and he says, "Hinei ano holech lamut," I'm going to die, and he lives on for 80 years. Okay, he's a very, he's kind of a depressed character. You want to see depression? Talk about, Jacob. Jacob is there's no marrying at 100. He doesn't take another woman after Rachel dies. He doesn't. He's depressed. He has every reason to be depressed. Of course, he's had a tragic set of circumstances in his life, and I'm making out Abraham to be this kind of heroic character who, despite all of the vicissitudes of life, the challenges of life, says, "God damn it, I'm just going to go ahead and do that." And that's what I admire about him. I admire the fact that at age 140 he can pick up and start a new family. I think that's really good. Okay, who else? Nothing else. there are a couple of hands I see. Marlene, go ahead.
You continually put Isaac in a very dour light. You say that his father had to find him a wife.
Yes.
Why couldn't it have been that he was watching out for his better side? He didn't want him to marry one of the local girls. So he sends Eliezer to find someone who would be, and then we can have the whole discussion of kindness and merit.
Yeah,
and
yeah. Okay.
strength.
So all I want to say that, I'll answer that very comically. I'm sorry. It deserves a much more serious answer. But if I had a son who's 40 years old, who wasn't married, and that I had to find a wife for him, okay, that tells you all you need to know. I'm sorry. I mean, it's like, get out and go meet someone. What's the matter with you? I would say, I mean,
except that he was 100 when he had his first child, so
but he had been married already.
Nothing. He's a youngster.
Yeah. Okay. Good. It deserves a better answer. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alana. Go ahead.
I just want to know if Ketura is not Hagar, which I disagree. But where did he find her?
We don't know.
Was it a shidduch?
No, we don't know. And again, your speculation is as good as mine. Local, was she part of the retinue of people from? But he took a nefesh asher asubachar. I'd love to think that she was part of the household, and that he really loved her, and that there's a real story here. Or I'd like to think that she was
concubine.
Teshuva.
Yeah, or I'd like to think that
he was playing around with her when Sarah was alive.
Yeah. I don't want to think of her as a rival to Sarah, but all of that is possible. I mean, I wish we had another half a verse to tell us more about her, but we don't. Okay.
But if she's Hagar, I'm being stubborn, I know. If she's Hagar, she was right around, so he didn't have to really look too much.
No, in fact, I would say as follows: if she was Hagar, he really had to send out a note to her. He had to find her.
He was so successful with Hagar, having Ishmael right away.
Yeah. Okay, all good. All right, we're gonna leave it there. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's a lot of fun always.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.